The November wind was a razor against the derelict farmhouse, stripping paint from the siding and moaning through the broken panes of glass. It carried the smell of rot and rain and the ghosts of 100 dead seasons. Inside, Jack Cutter sat at a scarred wooden table, the only light a weak gray rectangle from a dirty window. The cold from the concrete floor seeped into his bones, a familiar chill that had nothing to do with the weather. He was a ghost, haunting his own life. His hands, broad and calloused, moved with an old ingrained economy. They broke down the rifle, cleaned it, and reassembled it. The metallic slide of the bolt, the oily click of the magazine, seating home. These were the only prayers he knew anymore. The motions were a comfort, a link to a man he no longer was, a man who had a purpose, a man who had a team. Now he just had the farm, his parents' final failure left to him, their only son, another one of their failures. The land was fallow, the barn collapsing, the house a monument to decay. It was a perfect reflection of his soul. His leg ached, a deep, throbbing pulse that radiated from the titanium rod bolted to his femur. It was his personal weather station, always forecasting a storm of memory. He closed his eyes, and the gray Washington light was replaced by the blinding white of a Kandahar sun. The memory was an IED, exploding in his skull over and over. The pressure wave, the world turning to dust and fire, the screams cut short. He remembered the weight of Sergeant Marcus Ram Miller on top of him, shielding him. He remembered the wet, coppery smell of his friend's life spilling out onto the scorched earth. And he remembered Aries, Miller's German shepherd, a blur of fur and fury, turning back into the fireball to get to his handler. They had found the dog's scorched tactical vest later. Nothing else. They had given Jack a medal for his part in the firefight that followed. He'd thrown it into the Puget Sound the day he was medically discharged. A piece of tin for 5 good men and a dog better than most people. It was a piss-poor trade. He opened his eyes. The rifle was clean. It felt heavy in his hands, a final, cold solution. His finger traced the trigger guard. The ghosts were quiet today, but they were always there, whispering. They told him he should have been the one in the fire. They told him he had left his brothers behind. He was so tired of being haunted. He stood, the chair scraping against the concrete with a sound like a tombstone being dragged. The end of the barrel was cool against his temple. One more ounce of pressure, one final act of desertion. And then he heard it. It was a sound so faint it was almost nothing, a thin thread of misery woven into the howl of the wind. A whimper, not the sound of a coyote or a wild thing. This was the sound of domesticated pain, of a trust that had been betrayed. It snagged on something deep inside him, a wire tripped in the ruins of his heart. For the first time in years, a feeling other than despair stirred. It was annoyance, a violation of the perfect, silent misery he had curated. He lowered the rifle. The sound came again, stronger this time, a high, keening cry that was cut short, as if by a blow. He moved without thinking, his body remembering the fluid stealth of 1,000 night patrols. His limp was less pronounced when he moved with purpose. He slipped out the back door, the cold rain a welcome shock against his skin, washing away the dust of the tomb he called home. The wind bitted him, but he barely felt it. He was a predator now, hunting not prey, but the source of that sound. The whimpers led him to the edge of his property, toward the rusted fence line that separated his failed farm from his neighbors. He'd never met the man, just seen his junk-filled yard and the pit bulls he kept on heavy chains. The place radiated a greasy malevolence. He peered through a gap in the overgrown briars. The yard was a graveyard of dead cars and discarded appliances. And there, at the back, chained to a rusted engine block, was the source of the sound. She was a German shepherd, or what was left of one. Her coat was matted with filth and blood. Her frame so skeletal that her ribs were a cage holding nothing but a frantic heartbeat. A heavy chain, cruelly tight, was padlocked to a thick leather collar that had worn the fur from her neck raw. But it was her eyes that stopped him. They were old eyes, ancient. They held the same hollowed-out, 1,000-yard stare he saw in his own reflection every morning. They were the eyes of a soldier who had seen too much war. Around her, scattered in the mud, were the tiny, still forms of her newborn pups. They hadn't survived the cold. She was guarding her dead. He felt a tectonic shift inside him. The numb, gray landscape of his soul cracked, and something hot and black and furious began to well up from the fissure. It was rage. Pure, clean, righteous rage. It felt like coming home. A door on the far side of the yard slammed open. A bloated, greasy man in a stained tank top shambled out. Riggs. Jack had heard the name in town, a small-time meth cook and dog fighter. "Shut up, you useless bitch," Riggs bellowed. He kicked the dog, a solid, brutal thud to her ribs. She let out a choked cry, but didn't move from her dead pups. She just absorbed the blow, her old eyes never leaving the man. That was it. The world narrowed to a pinprick. The wind, the rain, the pain in his leg, it all vanished. There was only the threat, and the mission. Protect the innocent. It was a code so deeply buried he thought it was gone forever. He vaulted the fence. He landed silently in the mud, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper shadows of the dusk. Riggs was turning to go back inside, muttering about putting the dog down for good. He never saw Jack coming. Jack didn't say a word. Words were for negotiation. This was not a negotiation. His left hand clamped over Riggs's mouth from behind, stifling his surprised grunt. His right hand found the man's wrist, the one holding a length of pipe he'd been about to use. A sharp, practiced twist, a sickening pop, and a muffled scream from Riggs as the pipe clattered to the ground. He spun the man around, slamming him against the side of a rusted pickup truck. "She's not yours anymore," Jack growled, his voice a low, gravelly thing he hadn't used in years. It was the voice of command, the voice of a man who dealt in final outcomes. Riggs's eyes were wide with terror and pain. He saw not a broken farmer, but a killer. "Who the hell are you?" he whimpered through Jack's fingers. Jack drove his forehead into the bridge of Riggs's nose. There was a wet crunch. Riggs collapsed into the mud, a blubbering, broken mess. The fight, such as it was over in less than 10 seconds. It was pest control. He turned his back on the man and walked toward the dog. She was on her feet now, hackles raised, a low growl rumbling in her chest. She was terrified, but she was a warrior. She stood her ground between him and her lost children. "Easy, girl," he said, his voice dropping to the low, calm murmur he'd used with the working dogs on base. He showed her his empty hands. He knelt in the mud, putting himself on her level, ignoring the protest from his injured leg. "I'm not gonna hurt you." He didn't move closer. He just stayed there, letting her see him, letting her smell the rain on his jacket, and the absence of fear on him. He saw the flicker of confusion in her eyes. He was a threat, but he wasn't acting like one. He looked at the padlock on her collar. He'd need bolt cutters. He stood slowly, never taking his eyes off her. "I'll be back," he whispered, a promise. He returned to his barn, his movements swift and sure. He grabbed the heavy-duty bolt cutters from his workshop. When he returned, Riggs was gone, having crawled back into his hole. Good. The dog was still there, a statue of grief and defiance. "Okay," he said softly, approaching again. "Let's get you out of this." She watched him, her body a coiled spring. He could see the conflict in her, the instinct to bite, to defend, warring with a deeper exhaustion, a desperate, flickering hope. He didn't go for the collar. He went for the chain attached to the engine block. He gave her space. With a loud snap, the steel links parted. She was free of the anchor, but the chain and padlock still hung from her neck. She flinched at the sound, but didn't run. She just watched him. "Come on," he said, his voice gentle. "Let's go home." He turned and started walking toward the fence, not looking back. It was a test of trust, a leap of faith. For a long moment there was no sound but the rain. He felt a pang of disappointment. Maybe he was wrong. Then he heard it. The soft padding of paws in the mud behind him. The faint jingle of the chain. She was following him. He led her back to his house, into the warmth of the kitchen. She stood shivering on the worn linoleum, leaving muddy footprints, a wild thing brought indoors. She wouldn't let him get close enough to remove the collar. He didn't push it. He put down a bowl of fresh water. She watched it for a full minute before tentatively creeping forward and drinking, her thirst so profound she drank until the bowl was empty. He filled it again. He opened a can of tuna, the only thing he had that wasn't whiskey or coffee. He put it on a plate on the floor. She devoured it in seconds. Her body was starving, but her spirit was what concerned him. He had to get that collar off. He had to see a vet. He looked at the few crumpled bills in his wallet. It wouldn't be enough. He didn't care. He sat on the floor, a few feet away from her. "We're going to need a name for you," he said to the quiet room. She looked up from the empty plate, her ears twitching. He saw it then, a faded, almost invisible tattoo on the inside of her right ear. A series of numbers and letters. Military. A cold dread, a sense of impossible circularity, washed over him. He knew he couldn't get the padlock off himself without terrifying her further. The nearest 24-hour animal hospital was 40 miles away, in a town with more than one stoplight. He found an old blanket, one of his mother's, and put it in the passenger seat of his beat-up Ford truck. "All right, girl, road trip," he said. She was hesitant to get in the truck, but when he sat in the driver's seat and left the passenger door open, she eventually, after much sniffing and circling, leaped onto the seat. She curled into the smallest possible ball on the blanket, a shivering knot of pain and fear. The drive was silent, save for the hum of the engine and the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers. Every time he glanced over, her eyes were on him, watching, assessing. The animal hospital was a sterile oasis of bright light in the dark, rainy night. A young technician at the front desk looked from the blood and mud-caked dog to Jack's own disheveled, menacing appearance and immediately tensed. "We have an emergency," Jack said, his voice flat. It left no room for argument. A woman in blue scrubs emerged from a back room. She had tired eyes but a kind face. Her name tag read, Dr. Eris Thorne. She took one look at the dog and her professional calm clicked into place. "Bring her back," she said, her gaze flicking to Jack. "What happened?" "I found her," he said, the lie tasting like ash. It was too complicated to explain. Eris Thorne was good. She was gentle but firm, her hands confident as she examined the shepherd. Jack stood in the corner of the examination room, a useless, hulking sentinel. He felt as out of place as the dog did. The smell of bleach and antiseptic was a stark contrast to the farm's earthy decay. "She's severely malnourished, dehydrated, multiple contusions. And this collar." Dr. Thorne frowned, her fingers gently probing the raw, infected skin around the dog's neck. "We'll have to sedate her to cut this off." Jack just nodded. "Do what you have to do." "This will be expensive," Eris said, a statement, not a question. "Exams, sedation, medication, probably IV fluids." "I'll pay," Jack said, even as he knew his bank account was a flat line. He'd sell the truck, he'd sell the godforsaken farm, he'd figure it out. As Eris prepared the sedative, she paused to clean the dog's ear to take her temperature. That's when she saw the tattoo. Her professional demeanor shifted slightly. Curiosity. "She's military?" Eris asked, looking at Jack. "I don't know. I told you. I just found her." Eris didn't press, but after she administered the sedative and the dog's tense body finally went limp, she ran a scanner over her back. A microchip. "Well, let's see who she belongs to," Eris said, plugging the scanner into her tablet. She frowned at the screen. "That's odd. It's encrypted, heavily. But the prefix... I've never seen one like this. It's not a standard civilian registry. It looks like, Department of Defense." Jack's blood ran cold. The impossible feeling was back, stronger now. Eris, a self-professed amateur cryptographer, tapped away at her tablet. "I can't break the main file, but sometimes the metadata is sloppy," she murmured to herself. A minute later, her eyes widened. "Oh my God." "What?" Jack's voice was sharp. She turned the tablet screen toward him. A single line of decrypted text glowed in the dim light of the exam room. Project designation, K9 Aries 2. Asset status, active. Handler profile. Match, Miller, M. Deceased. Secondary search protocol, active. Aries. The name hit him like a physical blow. He stumbled back a step, his hand going to the wall for support. The sterile room seemed to tilt, the smell of bleach replaced by the memory of dust and cordite. What is it? What does that name mean? Eris asked, her voice laced with concern. He was my friend, Jack choked out, the words feeling like shards of glass in his throat. Marcus Miller. He was the dog's handler, the first Ares. Eris looked from the unconscious dog to Jack's ravaged face, the pieces clicking into place. This dog, she was looking for him? He's dead, Jack whispered. He died in my arms. The silence in the room was profound. It was the silence of a mystery solved, only to reveal a deeper, more painful one. This wasn't just a stray dog. She was a ghost, a legacy, a billion-dollar piece of military hardware with a broken heart, searching for a dead man. And now, somehow, she had found him. The truth of it was a weight and a revelation. The escapes from foster homes, from every other place she'd been. She wasn't running away. She was running to something. Guided by a protocol he couldn't fathom, a ghost in the machine. She was searching for the closest thing she could find to her lost partner. A broken soldier from the same unit. A man who smelled of the same grief. Before either of them could process the full implication, the front door of the clinic chimed. It was nearly 3 a.m. No one should be coming in. Aris went to the front, expecting a late-night emergency. Jack stayed with the dog, his hand resting on her flank. He could feel the steady rise and fall of her chest. He had a mission again. He heard Eris's voice, tense and professional. I'm sorry, we're closed to visitors. If you have an emergency. A man's voice, smooth and cold as polished steel, cut her off. We're not visitors. We're here for our property. We know she's here. The asset's transponder is active. Jack's head snapped up. His entire body went on high alert. The relaxed posture of the civilian fell away, and the coiled readiness of the SEAL took its place. He knew that tone of voice. It was the sound of a professional who has no intention of being denied. He moved to the door of the exam room, peering through the small window. 2 men stood at the counter. They were dressed in black tactical pants and plain jackets, but their posture, their haircuts, their alert sweeping gaze, it screamed military. Private contractors. The expensive kind. One of them saw Jack's movement. His eyes narrowed. He said something into his collar microphone. The time for talking was over. Eris, get back here, lock the door, Jack yelled. But it was too late. The man at the counter was already moving. He vaulted it with athletic grace. The other man was drawing a suppressed pistol. Jack reacted on pure instinct. He kicked the exam room door shut and slammed the lock. He grabbed a heavy rolling steel table and wedged it under the handle. It wouldn't hold them for long. What is happening? Eris cried, her back pressed against the far wall. They're not here to fill out paperwork, Jack said, his mind racing, cataloging the room. No windows, 1 door, stainless steel counters, cabinets full of glass bottles, a bad place to make a stand. A silenced gunshot thudded into the door, then another, blowing out the lock. The handle jiggled, then the door was forced open a few inches before the steel table held. They started ramming it. Thud, thud, thud. The metal frame of the door began to buckle. Jack scanned the room. A fire extinguisher, a cabinet of surgical tools, a tank of isoflurane anesthetic. An idea, desperate and insane, sparked in his mind. Get behind the counter, he yelled at Eris, and hold your breath. He grabbed the fire extinguisher. On the 3rd ram, the door flew open, the steel table screeching across the floor. The first contractor stepped in, pistol raised, sweeping the room. Jack met him with a face full of CO2 foam. The man sputtered, blinded and choking. Jack didn't hesitate. He dropped the extinguisher and drove forward, his elbow striking the man's throat in a precise, brutal jab. The contractor went down, gagging, his weapon clattering on the floor. The second man was already in the doorway. He saw his partner go down and raised his weapon. Jack was exposed. It was over. A blur of black and tan fur erupted from the floor. Kaiser. The sedation was wearing off. Or maybe her loyalty overrode the drugs. She launched herself with a guttural snarl, a 4-legged missile of pure protective fury. She hit the second contractor in the chest, all 70 pounds of bone and muscle. The man staggered back, surprised, his shot going wide and shattering a cabinet of medicine. He tried to bring his weapon to bear on the dog, but she was a whirlwind of teeth and claws, her training taking over. She wasn't going for the kill, she was going for the weapon arm, just as she'd been taught. Her jaws clamped down on his forearm. He screamed, a raw, high-pitched sound of agony. Jack scooped up the first contractor's pistol. It felt familiar in his hand. He leveled it at the second man. "Let go of the weapon," he commanded. The man, his arm being savaged, hesitated for a split second. It was 1 second too long. Jack fired, the suppressed shot a quiet cough. The bullet went through the man's shoulder and he dropped the gun. "Kaiser heel," Jack barked, the command torn from a half-forgotten past. Instantly the dog released her grip. She backed away, her chest rumbling with a low growl, her eyes locked on the wounded man. She took up a position beside Jack's leg, a perfect guard stance. She was no longer just a dog, she was his partner. "Get the truck keys," Jack said to Eris, who was staring, wide-eyed, from behind the counter. "Now." She fumbled in her pocket, her hand shaking, and tossed him the keys. Sirens wailed in the distance. The gunshots, even suppressed, had been heard. "They'll have the place surrounded," Jack said, thinking aloud. "We can't go out the front." He dragged the 2 contractors into the exam room and locked them in. It wouldn't hold them, but it would buy time. "There's a back door," Eris said, finding her voice. Through the kennels. They ran. The caged dogs erupted in a frenzy of barking as they passed. Jack, Iris, and Kaiser slipped out the back door into the rain-soaked alley just as the first police cruiser screamed into the front parking lot. They were fugitives. Him, a small-town vet, and a weaponized dog that the government had lost, and that a shadowy corporation desperately wanted back. They drove in Eris's sensible sedan, Jack at the wheel, pushing the small car harder than it was meant to go. Kaiser lay on the back seat, her head on Eris's lap, occasionally letting out a low whimper as the adrenaline wore off and the pain returned. "We need to go somewhere they won't look," Iris said. "My apartment is the first place they'll check." "They won't check my farm," Jack said. "They'll think it's too obvious, or they won't know about it at all. They tracked the dog, not me," he hoped. "Those men, they were going to kill us," Eris whispered. "They were going to retrieve an asset," Jack corrected grimly. "We were just complications to be removed." He drove without lights, using old logging roads he knew from his misspent youth. The farm was the only fortress he had. It was where this had to end. Back in the crumbling house, the war had come home. Jack worked with a frantic, focused energy he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was defending. He barred the windows and the doors. He found his old hunting rifle and a box of ammunition. It wasn't much against professionals with automatic weapons, but it was better than nothing. Aris, to her credit, didn't panic. She was a field medic now. She cleaned and bandaged Kaiser's wounds, then inspected the bullet graze on Jack's arm that he hadn't even noticed. "You need to call someone," she said, her voice steady. "The police, the FBI." "The police can't help us. And the FBI might be the ones who hired those guys," Jack said. He knew how these things worked. Black budget projects had a way of making official channels disappear. "There's only one person who might listen." He pulled out his old, battered cell phone. He scrolled through the contacts, past Mom and Dad, both long silent, until he found the one number he had saved but never called. "Commander Wallace." He took a deep breath and dialed. It rang 4 times, and he was about to hang up when a crisp, familiar voice answered. "Wallace." "Commander," Jack said, and was surprised at how his own voice cracked. "It's Cutter, Jack Cutter." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Cutter," Wallace finally said, his voice a mixture of shock and something else. "Regret, maybe. I'll be damned. I thought you were dead." "Not yet," Jack said grimly. "But I'm working on it." He quickly, tersely explained the situation. The dog, the name Ares, the contractors, the firefight at the vet clinic. When he was finished, the silence on the line was even heavier. Ares 2, Wallace breathed. We were told she was destroyed in a transport accident. She wasn't, Jack said. She's here with me. Then Wallace told him the rest of the story. The part that wasn't in the encrypted file. After the original Ares died with Miller, the DARPA program was in jeopardy. But the lead scientist, a man obsessed with his work, had cloned Ares. Ares 2 was genetically identical, but they couldn't replicate the bond. She was unstable, aggressive, refusing all handlers. During a clandestine transport, the convoy was hit. Not by insurgents, but by a rival corporation. They stole the dog, planning to reverse engineer the genetics. But she was bonded to Miller's DNA, Wallace explained. A deep neurochemical imprinting. She wouldn't work for them. She kept escaping, searching. The secondary protocol kicked in. If the primary handler was gone, she was programmed to seek the closest compatible match. Another member of the same unit. Someone who shared combat experience, trauma profiles. Someone who smelled like home. She was looking for me, Jack whispered, the truth of it landing with the force of a physical blow. He looked over at the dog, who was watching him with those intelligent, ancient eyes. She hadn't found him by accident. She had been hunting for him since the day she was born, a ghost dog, following the scent of a ghost soldier. They want her back, Cutter. Wallace's voice was grim. The corporation, Aegis Security, they can't afford to have their theft exposed. They'll sanitize the entire situation. That means you, the vet, and the dog. Headlights cut through the darkness outside, sweeping across the front of the house. A black SUV, then another, rolling up the long driveway without a sound. They're here, Jack said into the phone. Hold them off, son. Wallace's voice was steel. I'm already in the air. I'm bringing the thunder. Just hold your ground. That's an order. The line went dead. Jack grabbed the rifle. Get in the cellar, he told Eris. No, she said, her jaw set. She held up a large, stainless steel syringe. It's a powerful sedative. If one of them gets close enough, I can help. He looked at her, this civilian woman who had been pulled into his war, and saw the same grit he'd seen in the best soldiers. He nodded. Stay behind me. The first shots were precise. They took out the porch light, plunging the yard into darkness. Then they took out the windows. Glass exploded inwards. Jack and Kaiser were already on the floor. He knew their tactics. They'd breach from 2 points simultaneously. He moved to the narrow hallway that led from the kitchen to the living room. It was a natural choke point. The back door splintered. A team was coming through. He waited, his breathing slow and steady, the way he'd been trained. He was no longer Jack Cutter, broken farmer. He was Cutter, SEAL team leader. He was home. The first shadow filled the doorway. He fired once. The shadow dropped. The second one came in low. Jack fired again. Another hit. From the front of the house, he heard a loud crash as the main door was breached. Then a roar. Kaiser. She was defending the other entrance. He heard a man scream, a sound of surprise and pain, followed by the rapid, suppressed fire of an SMG. Kaiser, he yelled. A wounded yelp answered him. Rage, cold and absolute, filled him. He left his position and stormed into the living room. One Aegis operator was on the floor, his leg mangled by the dog. Another stood over Kaiser, ready to put a final bullet in her. Jack didn't hesitate. He brought the rifle up and fired from the hip. The operator was thrown backward, a red flower blooming on his black tactical vest. He ran to Kaiser. She was bleeding from a wound in her side, but she was alive. She whined and licked his hand. More men were pouring into the house. He was out of options, out of time. He pulled Kaiser behind a large, overturned couch, shielding her with his own body. He held the pistol, now down to its last few rounds, and waited for the end. He thought of Miller. He thought of his team. He had failed them then. He would not fail her now. And then he heard it. A sound that was music to his ears. The deep, rhythmic whoomp 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 of heavy rotor blades growing closer. The Aegis operators heard it too. One of them shouted, "Abort! Abort! We have inbound military birds." Floodlights from above bathed the farmhouse in brilliant white light. A voice, amplified by a loudspeaker, boomed from the heavens. "Aegis Security Forces, this is Commander Wallace of the United States Navy. You are in violation of national security protocols. Drop your weapons and surrender, now." It was over. The war had come to his doorstep, and he had held the line. 1 year later, the November wind still blew across the farm, but it no longer sounded like a moan. It sounded like a song. The farmhouse was rebuilt, the broken panes replaced, a fresh coat of white paint gleaming in the autumn sun. The barn no longer sagged. It stood tall, filled with hay and the sense of possibility. The fields were not fallow. A cover crop of clover blanketed them in green. Jack Cutter stood on the new front porch, a mug of coffee warming his hands. The ache in his leg was just an ache now, not a prophecy. The ghosts were gone. Or maybe they had just found their peace, the same way he had. A sleek, powerful German shepherd trotted up the steps and rested her head on his knee. Her coat was thick and glossy, her eyes bright and full of life. A faint, silvery scar ran along her side, the only visible reminder of the night the war came home. "Hey, girl," Jack murmured, scratching behind her ears. Kaiser thumped her tail against the porch steps. She was not a weapon anymore. She was a dog. His dog. Eris came out, wiping her hands on an apron. She'd traded her vet scrubs for jeans and a flannel shirt. The tired look in her eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady joy. She handed Jack a sandwich. "The new recruits are here," she said, nodding toward the driveway. A van from the county shelter was pulling up. Inside were 3 dogs, deemed unadoptable and aggressive, and 3 veterans, deemed unreachable and broken. With funding and clearance from Wallace, Jack had started a program. He called it the Ares Initiative. They paired lost soldiers with lost dogs. They saved each other. It turned out that the cure for his own haunted soul was helping others fight their ghosts. He looked at Ares, at the home they had built from the ashes of his past. He looked at Kaiser, his loyal partner, the ghost who had hunted him down not to haunt him, but to save him. She had escaped every home, every cage, because none of them were the one she was looking for. She had been following a map written in her blood, and in his, a map that led through darkness and pain, but ultimately led her here, led her home. Jack took a bite of his sandwich and watched the new veterans tentatively approach the kennels. He felt Kaiser press against his leg, a solid, reassuring weight. For the first time since he'd lost his team, he wasn't alone. He had a new pack and a new mission, and that was more than enough.